being here for...
We are not sacrificing, just postpone.
Postpone. Sacrifice is ritualistic. Yeah. So, we have a very dignified and erudite panel for discussing a very important issue, and that issue is survival of unwritten languages. We have seminar presentations and papers, but often it is found that the panel discussions bring out the best of what should be the suggestions, what should be the terms and categories through which to decolonize the cognitive categories and to prepare an India as well for future. All of us know that our unwritten languages have faced all kinds of challenges, yet they have survived. As an individual, I always feel that what is that energy in our unwritten languages that allows it to sustain in circumstances against all these dangers. So the basic question would be the question of survival of unwritten languages, factors that have gone into their survival, and what may be the strategy as well. For instance, I tell you that I do not know much of what may be the motivating force, but little that I know about Dangi Pukna community, that they didn't have script for long till the missionaries came and they wrote the Bible in Kokana. But the script that they chose was like Gujarati, for instance. But this Kokana community is part in Gujarat and part in Maharashtra. So in Gujarat, say about 3,29,000 Kokanas are there, and Maharashtra 5 lakhs plus. I'm not very sure about the data. What they have done is that they have made a pragmatic choice. And the pragmatic choice that they have made is that those who are on the side of Maharashtra, they have gone for Devanagari script. And those who are on this side of Gujarat, they have gone for Gujarati script. Now, this also may be one of the strategies that unwritten languages employed for the sustenance. There will be many such factors that would be examined and discussed in this particular session. And in this session we have very eminent people, Professor Sahitya, who is from Center for Linguistics, School of Languages, Literature and Culture Studies, JNU. We have Professor Kirti Jain. She is theatre personality and ex-director, National School of Drama. We have with us Joseph Bara, and Joseph Bara is an anthropologist. Is he around? Should be, maybe he would join a little later. Yeah. We have a Toda poet, Ma'am Vasamalli, and yesterday when she recited her poems, everybody was spellbound, and some of us could feel that. And we have Karthik Narayan, who has been orchestrating all the sessions till now, so he will also join with his views in this particular session. And finally, Shakrita ma'am, a good old friend, to join this discussion. And in this session, what we plan to do is that each speaker gets about 10 minutes. And once the presentations are over, then they will be left open for interaction, and wherein all of us can join. And that would really be a feast of ideas for unwritten languages in their future. I would, in that order, request Professor Sahitya to enlighten the audience.
Hello all. So the perspective that I'm going to bring is going to be partly linguistic, but there won't be any linguistics really in it, so that you will not suffer. I want to ask and I think illustrate the problems when we, as linguists, give a slogan that languages that don't have scripts should be given scripts. I don't think there's any quarrel about the fact that they should be given scripts, but there are a number of attendant problems. Just historically, there was one of the countries that was as vibrant, linguistically diverse as ours, which did give language scripts. By 1925, the Soviet Union had given each of its language a script. And during the nationalist discourse in India, this was often cited as an example of what one can do. There is still a lot of language endangerment in the former Soviet Union. The expression and the flowering of small languages in contemporary Russia or any of the states of the CIS. All of those, those things remain still issues. So unwritten languages, of course, are frequently very marginalized. In India, there is a particular problem. You don't have to be very small to be to be an unwritten language. You can be a very, very big language and be unwritten. But typically, in the world over, they have small population numbers. Usually, the configuration is of a minority facing a majority, and this has to be, of course, regionally defined. They typically have non-metropolitan locations. Most of this is not true in India, but generally this is the way that linguists define it. Typically, people who speak these languages are economically poor. Politically, they are marginalized, do not have a voice. Socially, certainly marginalized as well, because and frequently that is on the basis on the world over on a linguistic basis, again not so much in India. And they have little access to quality social services such as education, health, etc. I think, and frankly, we must say from a position in India that just being written, actually the position worldwide, that just being written doesn't mean that you're going to have vitality. So languages like Latin and to some extent Sanskrit have very small domains of use. They have long written traditions. But there are a number of factors that go into determining the vitality of a language. Being written doesn't necessarily produce a vitality. And so the languages can be either dead or moribund, or their domains of use chunk to a few. Now, in linguistics, the standard logic that is given is that we should have a script because we want preservation. We want the oral to be reduced to have the opportunity to be expressed in the written. And there are a number of slogans that we give out, which have happened. It's not the case that this is just empty. That if you give a language a script, then you have a greater chance of literacy, and therefore education and property and possibilities of economic development. Then most importantly, for particularly this seminar, but I think for people as a whole, it gives you the opportunity to do cultural expression and a wider communication of cultural values. It gives the languages that have a written script, it gives them the ability to have a grammar so that produces a certain self-confidence and then a greater security in one's own identity. And then appreciation by others. If you're not written down, nobody will ever know about you, and the richness of your language will never be done. And of course, increasingly, the option to use it in the electronic media, which we agree is one of the most dominant forms of. I want to strike a cautionary note to this idea of preservation and the expansion of domains. It's not at all clear that everything that one in the translation from oral to written, that everything that defines a community is necessarily preserved. Right? Because writing produces not only a mode, it does not produce a mode of transcribing the oral. It produces a written register. And in that written register, so then you get, standard artifacts like novels and poems and short stories, and so there is a hegemonic cultural practice on what counts as a written register. And so what do get is an attrition of the oral register and all its genre. So that's very difficult. You can see this in written languages too, that a ghazal and a nazm are not necessarily distinguishable in their written form, but they are distinguished in their performance form. And that, of course, if you have a written tradition that is old, then you have a vibrant oral tradition, it's different, like for many of the Indian languages. However, if you're a very small language, right, and your traditions are not really shared or reproduced and disseminated through cultural artifacts and through work, then you have a problem. But also a written register has a different logic of innovation and development. So an example that I find very evocative is the song lines that Australian Aboriginals use, which is long oral maps of how to go from point A to point B in the Australian outback. And Bruce Jackman notes that there were even oral maps of how to take the London Metro. Right? And they were all because people who had of Aboriginal had travelled there, and then of course you map the world that you travel through language and you traverse it through. Now those things are very difficult to preserve in the written, and it's a particular cultural artifact. The second thing a written register does in much more detail is Sanskritization, and I use it not in the sense of saying that this is some higher value that we want to approximate to, but a value which involves actually elision of local specificity, or and to adopt what is considered to be the majority viewpoint. And so this can be local also, Sanskritization, in terms of that the written register assimilates the community to what is the dominant area, forms and narratives and textual styles of the local community, or it can be to a more hegemonic sort of hegemonic or nationalized. And what you have with the written register is, of course, a break from old traditions. And so therefore you not necessarily get transparency. So if you have a particular tradition of recording history in Gathas or and you have a modern tradition, which it's not necessarily that the two traditions have anything in common. So basically what I'm saying is that a written register comes with a hegemony of its own. So that what you're not doing is representing or just simply transcribing, you're transforming. Okay? The recording of flora and fauna, one basis by which I think lots and lots of linguists and social anthropologists written what the kind of taxonomies of space, region that are produced by oral cultures are not produced or reproducible in the same way by written cultures. You also have standardization, and so which actually can create, if you give languages a script, you can create an inequality by who created that standard. So you can, so in languages, and there are many such. Kuruk is a good example of such a language, where there was a gender left, women spoke differently from men, women to women conversation is different from women to men conversation. And if you look at any Kuruk grammar, right from the time that was written by missionaries and now which is being produced by Kuruks themselves, what you find is that the gender left, which was a means of communicating or women addressing women, has disappeared. Okay? And what you have is typically grammarians do this hodgepodge, which no Kuruk can understand. Right? Okay. And if you give a language a script, then you create an academy. And that academies also have hegemonic intentions of their own. Okay. But also this creates, aside from the elision of a lot of regional and gender caste differences, you can also produce conflict between other languages or dominant languages which employ a script, the same script, or a script of their own. So there is a whole attendant problems. Now luckily, because we don't have a government policy on giving scripts to Indian languages, therefore there is no conflict. But in many languages, in many regions where there are indigenous populations that have been used, script, then there has to be a government intervention in determining what are the possible script regions that we give. An example is Tripura, where scripts have been given to many languages, but the Mayang are holding out, and the script, there's a big debate between, actually the script for Kokborok has not been able to develop because the Bengali script is hegemonic. But this writing things down produces an hegemony. Who is writing it down? Right? So there in a traditional society, elders or people who are the holders of knowledge. Right? And the holders of knowledge are not often the transcribers of knowledge. Right? So there is a shift that is created by writing in a community, which is can be extremely violent for a community. Further, giving a script isn't enough. If you look at a UNESCO document, which is on developing unwritten languages, reading a script isn't enough. You have to create a culture of literacy in which it is used. And so many Indian languages have scripts, but do we have cultures of literacy in which scriptural use is embedded? So you have to develop written literature, and I've already pointed out the problems from transitioning from an oral to a written literature. Typically, where languages have scripts, then people are developing functional or religious material. But people have to develop a culture of literacy, you have to have reading pleasure. That means you have to orchestrate writing if you want. And that's not so easy always. Besides newspapers, you need gossip magazines, and besides dictionaries, you need comics. You also need to promote a literate environment so that the literacy becomes embedded in the individual and the community. And how can you do that? Only if literacy improves the quality of life. So it gives you access to things that you don't have. And it must be accessible to all. So it must be accessible to women and men, to children, and to people of different castes. And literacy is locally self-reproducing. That is, people who you have an audience for it, and that's you write it down right from a prescription to everything else. So I'd like to leave you with the thought that in a country where nearly 50% is illiterate, we do not create this environment for literacy for any of the major languages that have been written down for centuries. So if you're thinking of small languages, focusing on just scripts is of course not enough, but leaving them unwritten isn't enough either. So I would actually like to echo the thoughts of Professor Bilimale, that it isn't enough. I mean, what you need to do is create an oral literate culture, which is completely distinct, which is representative more of our reality. And of course, technology produces some of those opportunities, but we must not exaggerate the availability of technology and see it as a panacea for all this. So what I would like, if we could have some discussion about what would be that alternative conception, because these problems are really very specifically Indian problems.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kedway, particularly for putting across quite a few theses, I would say. And he very rightly underscores the fact that being written does not necessarily mean vitality of the language. Written has some advantages, script has some advantages, but what are the other issues that are involved, they also need to be taken into consideration. The last 2 points that she made, they're very relevant for us because she is speaking about a suitable habitat for oral culture as such. And then what may be the alternatives to the propositions like use of technology for preservation of oral cultures and all. And I think all these issues will be taken up for discussion, which we should have after presentations. Dr. Kedway, I would like to have the views from a different perspective, from a linguist to person from theatre. I would invite Dr. Kirti Jain for her views. As I told you, she was formerly with NSD as director. Ma'am.
Thank you very much. I feel slightly intimidated, surrounded by language experts, but I do come from a totally different vantage point, and which is theatre. For us, I would say that we celebrate the fact that these are unwritten languages because we deal with orality, we deal with the body, we deal with the sound. So for me, it's a matter of celebration that they're not written. And as Sahitya correctly pointed out, the large amount of our population is not written. So to reach out to people, to make bridges, I think this doesn't come very. Theatre deals with language, but several languages. It's not just the word. It deals with a language of space, which contextualizes whatever we are doing, or rather changes, transforms every little action depending on the space. It deals with the body, it deals with sound, it deals with objects, and it is the whole which makes for the theatre language. It is along with the word. The word is just one component of these several languages which put together create a reality. And therefore, and when these come together, when you find such a cultural expression which brings all these together, they're really capable of opening up the history, the cultural practices, the religion, the geography, the occupations, the rituals, customs, relationships, gender equations, power equations, associations, etc. So I feel that sort of theatre in a way is a very, very suitable, because it's a composite art form, it's a very suitable form to address some of these concerns of either preservation or propagation. And I think the kind of collaboration between these two concerns can answer some of the things that we're talking about. When this concern is being articulated here about preserving unwritten languages, it reminds us of our debates which have been carrying on from the 80s about what do we do with the several traditional and tribal theatre forms or cultural expressions like dance and music. The Sahitya Akademi, which deals with performing arts, is actually battling with this idea that should we be preserving these forms, should we be moving to keep them alive, and what are the methods by which we can really keep them alive. And this concern becomes all the more important, or rather contentious, because of the state of development, what we call development in our country, which is very uneven. So there are different perspectives. We as urban people find it very romantic to be able to go and see a traditional performance. And we mourn the fact that, oh, it is changing, oh, it is, sort of getting all technological, it should have stayed, it was so beautiful. But that's our perspective, which is like a perspective of a tourist. Sort of tourist, or let's say a Puritan, whatever. But from their perspective, it would be a totally different story. I mean, they are trying to survive in a changing world which they can't comprehend. And because the development is uneven, they don't have all the means to change it in a way that maybe urban practices change or change with exposure. And yet, some changes are coming, which are sometimes distorting, sometimes finding a way to. So this was a real debate and continues to be a debate even in the performing arts field. And having interacted with several traditional forms, I would just like to share a very small story. Once about 30 years back, we had gone with our students to Gujarat to meet or interact with Hawaii artists, a very senior Hawaii artist who had spent his lifetime in Gujarat. When the students were asking him questions, he suddenly turned to me and he said, "Why have you come here?" I was also slightly taken aback, and I said, "Well, we wanted that our students should learn about this form, and maybe that some of them will get enthused and might want to take it forward." go back. We are now on oxygen. The moment the oxygen is removed, we die. So there is no. That was so moving that for a person who's given his life to create an excellence in the form, has now given up. And it's true that, sort of we as a people were not able to even give them, leave aside any other support, even give them respect, even give them a sense of how important they are in the fabric of the nation and its culture. So I feel that the first step towards keeping any of these alive, first step to even be able to preserve them, would be to reach out to the people and give them some kind of a moral support, give them a sense of how important they are, give them a sense of the special quality that they have. Because very recently, about a week back, I was in a region where there are these Baga tribes, Benga tribes. And they are shy when you ask them to sing a song. They are shy to try to speak to you. Because in their minds, officials who interact with them, even officials who want to help them preserve their language and culture, make them feel that their language is inferior. Constantly they are encountered with a sense of inferiority, a sense of hierarchy, a sense of being backward, a sense of being disabled. And I think that's what we need to counter. And the other thing I think which will help, I personally feel it positively will help, if we were to create structures that people or the younger generation of that region gets educated in their own language. I mean, that creates a different kind of support structure for respecting your own language and being able to retain the nuances of that language. It's only when the younger generation learns it, then they have the confidence to transform it, which it needs to change in time. And of course, to create economic opportunities in that language, so that because ultimately the bottom line will be that why we want to learn that language. If we want to learn it, we will be there in the I know this, I think, that you can because these are oral traditions, I think they are much more dynamic, they are much more communicative, they use more parts of their body to say whatever they are saying. And theatre, whenever we work in theatre, we never find the language hindrance. So suppose one were to go and work with them, you would need somebody who would be able to help you interject as part of the process. But other than that, I think preparing performances, preparing any kind of something to be shown or something to be expressed would be exciting for them. Because they have tremendous improvisational skills. They learn to improvise because of the kind of survival situations that they live in. So what we need to do is reach out to their stories, reach out to their myths, reach out to their concerns, and create performances around them, which will partly revive their stories, their myths, which are again also dangled out of the language. Now in this Belga tribe, I found, sort of talking about their history, about 80 years back, they were from being hunting communities, they were shifted and they became given land to farming. They have not yet taken the farming, they don't feel very confused, but they have lost out on all the music and the performative traditions to do with hunting. So most of the present generation doesn't remember that. So of course, when I was talking to some women, they said, oh, we made even women. But most of the women are no longer part of it. And this hasn't become a very integral part of it, the cultivation rituals or performance rituals have not yet become very ingrained. So I do feel that to be able to even retain a historicity or history of these people who speak these languages, we need to bring out their stories, we need to tell their younger generation, and then maybe even share with the other populations, so so that people become sensitive to what they have to offer or what they bring to our lives, the kind of complex worldview that they have, or a different worldview that they have, can be kind of brought into focus. And I think in this, Kabir Tanvi was a very good example where he worked with this very artists, very often use their stories, sometimes use even plays like Shakespeare and Kalidas, playwrights like that, but told stories in the way that they would probably tell those stories. And I think that's what we need to do today, and the people from different performative traditions will probably get together and be able to present it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for bringing a kind of altogether different perspective, and the way you suggested multiple strategies for not only survival but the prospective thriving of the oral cultures. We would certainly discuss these things, but keeping positive time in mind. I need to move to the next speaker and changing little order because Professor Sukrita Kumar wants to join theatre without poetry. So we from theatre we move to a different perspective, that perspective of a poet towards the issue of unwritten languages. We have Professor Sukrita Kumar, please.
I'm very excited. I thought I was going to be the award woman now. But I'm very fortunate that Aisha began the way that she did and ended by talking about absolutely prioritizing actually the oral rather than the unwritten rather than the written. And similarly, I think theatre went into the whole idea of not romanticizing the language of theatre, but even grounding it more and talking about, okay, what is the need to, create a script around it. Now, what I want to say is something about poetry, right? And that's really absolutely personal, experiential sharing that I want to do today. In the context of how I lament that I'm retrained in English literature, which has meant, what is a poem, what's a lyric, it's like boxed. All the norms are also laid out, and it's the written tradition. And for the last 10 years or so, I have been trying to unlearn all of that. So can we descript it? Where is the unsaid? Actually, the said, or rather what I write as poetry, to me it becomes a poem only when the unsaid is taken into account by the said. By that I mean, and of course in theatre it also happens, in literature it's bound to happen, in oral traditions it's there. Many things are taken for granted, culturally and so on, because there is no need to explain things, and yet from the very localized reality, there is a rising above it, and it reaches, whatever is said, reaches, the other ages, the past, the future, where all time exists, which I'm not romanticizing. I'm talking about how some very basic emotions and thoughts and ideas get shared anyway if you are realizing the aesthetics of communication. I'm not talking about aesthetics of only very restrictively poetry. To me, poetic means something more than writing poetry. It's really the art of living somewhere, And that's what we are losing out on. We need to actually, if at all any scripting that needs to, first of all, unlearn the scripts, damn it. Sorry, I'm using this, but I'm sick of it, When somebody comes to you and, you acquire a certain kind of seniority in academics and young, innocent minds come to you and say, well, how do I write a poem? I want to write somebody else. Like somebody, say the iconic figures in English literature, Wordsworth, Tennyson, this, that, and the other, Browning. I am telling them, at least all of that. In oral traditions, it exists so naturally because it's really married, that tradition is married to living itself, out of the local reality. So what I really am wanting to plead for is that yes, let's not get to that domain where we are saying that the language gets very empowered if the script happens. I think we need to pay more attention to the whole idea of that sense of beauty which is married to a certain big kind of domain of ethics and norms and values of a certain kind, not hurting the other. In today's context, we have too much of language which is hitting at each other all the time. So what I really believe is, and I would like to refer to a small experience that I had very recently, about 6 months ago. I was trying to go up the river from Haridwar side and just wanted to explore that area. And I happened to come across a person who was not able to speak. And I tell you, in today's time, and this fellow was trying to get me to give him some money because he was carrying a weighing machine. And through gesture, this is a very powerful language of gesture. It has its own grammar, it has its own rules of how to, and you would know about that as well. Even that language, how do you incorporate that within your everyday communication? Today, this gentleman is my best friend. He's not able to speak. Every day I'm getting a call from him where only primal sounds are there. No words. And I have understood that his wife is pregnant, and that I've understood that he needs somewhere some kind of support, a good hospital, etc. There are many other things. But what I'm talking about is that basic communication needs to be kept in mind at a primal level, which also takes care of the other, which is also within ourselves all the time. And I think when I'm talking about the unwritten language of poetry, that's what I'm referring to. That's what I want to refer to. The poetry that connects, the poetry that actually, in today's context, in the American context, in a very recent International Festival of Poetry, I saw a whole session devoted to what is called sound poetry. We have it here all the time, on a traditional. A lot of poetry is sound poetry. So seeing is what you were referring to, seeing through the images that get created and the sounds that get created. And this obsession with meaning. Why are we obsessed with meaning all the time? If we put experience in the center, in the real, our kind of existential thought process or living or whatever I'm trying to articulate, I think we cannot reduce everything to fixed meanings. We have to get out of academic thinking. I'm talking about that academic, which is kind of restrictive. It is drawing frames all the time, so many frames that you end up having seminars on how to get out of the box. But that remains only at the seminar level. How do you think out of the box? So I'm really going into a very philosophic, maybe, the linguists are here to tell me that is really actually happening in the field of language, understanding of language, as to what is behind the word and what is ambiguity and what is suggestiveness and what is the language of poetry all about. And that poetry is what I'm talking about. And all of us have that within ourselves. And if we are able to discover that language, I don't think they can. We are also therefore then center staging experience of living. So if that specificity is realized, the greater the roots in the specific experience, the greater the length of the height of the tree, reaching out to the skies. So really, keeping in mind all the lovely traditions and wonderful traditions we have to actually critically analyze them, if at all in academic circles we are meeting and Sahitya Akademi and so on. We need to do the critiquing so that the boxed ideas are actually, suppressed somewhere or reinterpreted and they revibrate with the dynamism that we, and not think in terms of, I'm not thinking in terms of any kind of revivalism, if you please, because that's very dangerous. I'm only thinking of opening up more and more doors of communication and connections and bonding, which actually, I'm reminded of a scene from Waiting for Godot. Lucky's speech is most meaningful, and what is he saying? Perhaps nonsense. That nonsense has to come to us, it has to run into our blood. Thank you.
Thank you. This was a poet's passionate appeal for unwritten language of poetry. Perhaps she was thinking of poetry in the Greek sense of thesis, that is making, and I could see that she was referring to a kind of poetry which is to be heard first and understood later, which is to be overheard first and heard later on, and that silence of words, that overhearing of language, that our oral language, so-called oral languages that don't have script, and how to keep experience in the center. Thank you very much. We move to an anthropologist, Dr. Joseph Bara, to join us with his views. So we would have now a different perspective. We have perspective from a linguist, from a theatre person, from a poet. Now it's your turn, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm the person who is basically to come here. Great privilege to different courses. But history is very yeah. Well, I was saying, basically I am a person of history. I was a little reluctant to come here, but somehow I feel that history is also a close friend of literature. But I feel very happy to be in the circle of the literature persons here. You know, Professor Abby persuaded me to come here, but it was so kind of me. You see, my area has been tribal history, and in that connection I study education, development of the tribals, and of course language, literature, what is emerging in the tribal thinking. Now, as a person of history, I think that the whole question of survival of unwritten language comes only when the system of writing comes. About the tribals, I was listening to you, I was listening to you. Singing, talking is singing, walking is dancing, that is what is said about the tribals. I mean, everything is improvised. And in a way, for generations, thousands of years, the languages have survived. How the question of survival emerged, I mean, as a student of history, it takes me. It all emerges from about the mid-19th century, when first education knocked at the door of the tribal cultures. It has been traditions for generations. Now, for the first time, tribal languages, tribal subjects have been recorded from about 1560. The first literature, if I remember, I'm sorry, I'm confining to Central India. I'm not very familiar with the development in Northeast India, but I suppose developments are almost the same. But the first book, as a student of history, I know is Santhal and Santhalia by a person called E. Mann. He was a civil servant and he wrote this book in 1867. The other work, almost simultaneously, I think 1868, it was the Richard Temple among the gone. Papers relating to central provinces at that time, Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh were central provinces. About the gods, this is the first literature. I suppose these two literatures create a basis for the writings of the tribals. It has one aspect of language, culture, and it has about the literature, about the knowledge, about the tribal society, and the other part about the language. So now subsequently, and this was the period when some of the great writings on ethnology came. This was the period when the British included spread over the tribal areas for the first time. It was only for the outskirts, and Seaman will travel, will write something at a landing, etc. But literature, organized writing, came only the vehicle when the need of understanding the colonial people, and most importantly, the people around whom the resources are available to tribal people. Forest, mineral resources. So now, tribals were also disturbed, they were also resisting the British rule, it brought a host of forces inimical to them. So that's why tribals were restless everywhere. So how to pacify them was a challenge. That's why this body of literature comes as a way of understanding the tribal people. It was racist, and it was also the time when we should remember the great period of racism, where great evolution theory was threatened. So certainly, whatever literature comes in at this stage, very prejudiced against the tribal, all details about the tribals, but highly prejudiced against the tribals. Now, this was the time of also the missionaries, Christian missionaries. Interestingly, it was the Christian missionaries who took up the language part. Only the language part of tribal literature, of the tribal culture. It was because, they had the understanding that Hindi is the language of this people. They learned that this was not the tribal language. So that for the first time, they started developing grammar. In fact, it was 1874 when the first grammar for tribal language. Oh, before that it was this study called Felix Oxenthal, I think in 1950s. But these were the first set of grammar. Then comes vocabulary. So vocabulary and grammar were developed by missionaries for their own need, and these were very rudimentary. But they laid the foundation for future development of tribal languages, grammar, vocabulary, and ethnology. At the turn of the century and very early 20th century, there was a stream of ideas called humanitarian. It was humanitarian. If you know about history of the West, it was a period of anti-slavery movement. And this wave of humanitarianism reaches here, and then we have its reflection in the tribal, in the writings of the tribals was that there is sympathetic. Those who were writing were sympathetic. They were trying to closely understand the tribal culture, tribal people. So that's why, for the first time, in the earlier 20th century, we had great ethnological writings, but in a different way. That is S.C. Rowe. It was written in 1915 to the Mullas and the country. And this was the book, which was probably the first book which tried to understand the tribal people from close quarters. Then of course, there was a great missionary, J.B. Hoffman, who was a German, a Jesuit, based at Lanchi and in the line of the Birsa movement, and actually a contemporary of Birsa. So Birsa movement afforded him to observe the tribal society, observe the agrarian problem of that part of the country very closely, and then he wrote some 15 volume of Encyclopedia Mundarica, which is available everywhere. And this is not simple encyclopedia. This is very elaborate. About the line system, there are some 10 pages of explanation. Some of the words maybe just one line or one liner, but then most of the words, terms are explained in detail. Then there is, again, similar work, P.O. Body, another mystery. There are he published 5 volumes of Santhal dictionary. So this is how knowledge on the tribal society, the tradition of writing and its pro-tribal approach is seen here. But then, this was also the period, a very important part of this development was, I must emphasize, close involvement of the tribals. J.B. Hoffman had a person called Menasori, Amuna. He was the person merely matriculated, but he was the person who supplied all the materials to J.B. Hoffman. And J.B. Hoffman was a German missionary. He was external during the First World War, but he carried all the materials to Germany. And he wrote all these volumes, 16 volumes in Germany, and the government of Bihar and Odisha at that time, 1930s, 40s, published all the 15 volumes. Then also, this was the age literature, folklore is very known. W.G. Archer. He was a colonial civil servant. Now, he also, interestingly, I'll tell you a very interesting story. Archer's first volume, Oral Folktales. The material for this was collected by a tribe. Through some channel it reached W.G. Archer, who was at the time after taking voluntary retirement from colonial service, was keeper of music, Victoria music, and had emerged as an important folklorist. So it was the whole material of that Quran that he carried and he published it. So the point I want to make is, even S.C. Roy, whom I mentioned, all depended upon the tribals for material. The tribals are active players in this body of development of knowledge. Now here, apart from the tribals, I mean missionaries were very closely understanding, very closely, they were spreading over the tribal areas in the nook and corners of the district of various districts. So they were also great, the special feature about the missionaries of this time was they were very inquisitive and master explorer of knowledge, ideas about the local societies. So that's why there are many other missionaries who wrote about the tribal society. But this was, I suppose, the golden period of writing about the tribe. Now, as I said, the tribals were great players in that. But then, problem with the following decades was, that is, it was hardly followed up. Only in 1960s, the professionals came into being. Professor Ramdev Munda and a host of other linguists and others come to the beach. But before I wind up, I must point out that one feature that of the tribal literary development of the period post 1950 period was that it was basically not a pro-tribal writing, but mostly anti-tribal writing. And the reason is, this was the nationalist social workers' phase. Remember, it was talked about anarchism, where national psyche was the tribal means. I mean, because we don't talk about indigenous racism, we only talk about Darwinism. We had in this country an indigenous racism. Tribals, we understood was only from the sources of Ramayana, Purana. Tribals' own traditions, which were explained in this Encyclopedia Mundalika, which even I have not never seen a library here in India or in the West, any major library where these volumes, Santhal History and Encyclopedia Mundalika are not available. Everywhere. But somehow, this was a parallel development also. Everything against the tribe was being written, and this was despite the reason, despite the fact that Nehru in 1957, I think it was because of being under the influence of Mary Edwin and Shepal Singh Munda, who asserted that tribals had their own genius. Tribals are autonomous systems, they are not part of the what is called mainstream culture. So it was 1958 Nehru, in preface to Mary Edwin's philosophy of Nepal, asserted that tribals had their own genius, and this was imagined. Nehru said at the time when world over, tribes means subsystem, subculture of the bigger culture. That was the thinking dominating everywhere. In 1957, in fact, the International Labour Organization document still called that the local culture, tribal cultures had to be based still. But Nehru in 1953, I mean, this is probably a major thinking on tribes where Nehru, that tribals had their own genius, but then there were no takers of this idea, and then most absurd things about the tribals have been written in this period. Only recently, I find persons like Ramdas Munda have written Adi Dharm, and there are some other writers. Always when there is some kind of, political movement, just do this. Some kind of cultural vinasa among the tribals, that there is a kind of tribal intelligentsia which has tried to assert the tribal point of view. Now, the problem I find at the moment is, some of the untapped tribal literature, oral literature, have not really attended to work. It's generally sung at the time of the marriage ceremony. It's a kind of, dialogue between the two groups. And these are the sources which there is a wonderful collection some 40, 50 years back, but that somehow have not been very probably some have been corrected there, but then almost, apart from that, almost remain untouched. Rather, we think of, there is no, whatever has been written has never been critiqued, and rather we have dominance of Ramayana story, Mahabharata story, even within that, they have not been critiqued. Why? Certain figures, like theme is an important figure in tribal narratives of Mahabharata. But this particular, some kind of pure, chaste tribal literature, oral literature, found in what is called Dhuram among Santals, Mundas, and many other such things, for which one has to go to the one has to probably connect to the tribal society these days. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Joseph Barra, for bringing out the trajectory of historiography of tribal discourse in India. And one important factor that I could see was that what he calls the golden period of tribal writing was the period in which the involvement of tribals was ensured by the then colonial or subsequent authors. So if we think of some strategy, then what the lesson for us is that without active participation and collaboration of the tribals for whom it is written, about whom it is, it will not be possible to do justice with that. Thank you very much, Professor Vara, and we have 2 more speakers. My request is to restrict to 10 minutes so that we can have some good time for discussion. And I would invite then Professor Basamalli. Ma'am, please.
Thank you for the chairperson. I'm really so much came to my mind. Before I was just in a small place, what to talk and how to convey my message. After hearing many people's speech, I will tell what I feel. Language is very important because whether it is tribal or non-tribal, whoever it may be, their own language, one can convey their message in a better way. So in that case, we have to preserve our language. That is very, I felt. Because then what is, just shortly I want to finish, but I have so many these things. I want to convey whatever I feel. I'm Vasamali from Nilgiris. Nilgiri means the biosphere place, good environment and all. That's why many people are talking about Todas and Nilgiris. Because these Todas are one and all with the nature culture. Everything is all their cultures. It's a literature culture based on the mountains, rivers and everything. They named it. And plants, it's about, they are botany people, astrologers, they name the star, moons, everything. So these are all to be preserved. How to preserve? By ourselves. Maybe their own tribal can preserve because since 1818, nobody has come there. Only Todas and Nilgiri people we call ourselves or Mav, Kurb, Arl, Purni. 6 tribes, we have our own names. Later, many other people came, we gave them pure, that means foreigners, any outsiders. So in that situation, we followed our culture, we lived in our own way, we talked our language, we sang songs and our purely, no mixed and all. So that way we protected our literatures. It was very stamped oral literature. The story will be definite story, we can prove this mountain, this place, Then Kartik came and he was asking, tell some story. I said, I can't tell storytelling mistakes. People find me. Oral story is very story. Then I took him to place where the goddess had a child and where the cave was there, like that. So as far as this land exists, our literature will be existing. As far as our traditional occupation exists, our songs and way of life will be existing. Then if you forget our religious practice, our nature will die. In front of our mountain, we believe we just look through that mountain and believe sun is coming. So if that mountain is destroyed nowadays, they built a big building. Now we don't have this sacred feelingness. So this way our culture goes. To protect our culture, we have to protect our nature. how to prove, to protect, through our language, we can prove this is our way of life. So, luckily, I had a chance to work with some thinkers, Abhinam Kam and Karthik sir, and one Mr. Professor Bhaskara sir came, and he was making me to write and like that. I was wondering how to cooperate with him because he is doing like a chemist analysis. Each word, each letter is working. Then only I realized how difficult this linguist work is. But at that time, I was able to read Dr. Yamino's Grammar and Text. He took 1935 to 1975. His book was published. Maybe I'm right. I don't know. Yeah. 1935 he started his work. I think more than 3 years he worked with the people. I was a small girl. I remember one European man was coming along very vaguely. Then other musician, I forgot his name. He was telling we are going to celebrate his 100 years, Dr. Mano's birth. Then we composed one song about this 100 years birthday. Then while we are going through, we found is missing one spelling, S or ish. So that we through Bhaskara sir, he told and he accepted, I think so. That's what happening. So in that way, to convey our message, language is essential. We can tell in which any languages to others. That is important. Oneself should preserve our language and as much possible to learn other languages because it's a tool to make friendship and live happily in the world. I want to, my experience, how I learned, I studied in travel school. There I'm fortunate to have a Toda surroundings. That school is for the Kotas and Toras. So small childhood itself we have to practice songs and embroideries and some stories and nowadays it's not possible to that situation, but it was like that. So I got a route to develop that. I was asking my elders, what is this, why is this, so many questions we put. Like that each community or anybody, they should develop their own knowledge and literature to preserve, that is one thing. If it is gone, then that is one. There is one proverb says, Odsum dirchi, mort nirchi. That means we are having painful when we are in poverty, but that will go away. When we speak the bad words, that will be like a more painful than a beating. So when we use our words, we have to use always good words. So that way we have to protect all our language, what are all good in that, maybe poetry, there is a word which is useful to the world. When we discover about the sun, mountain, how we are enjoying, just imagination comes. When we abuse somebody, how they are painful, how we are getting tension and we are all getting, BP, sugar like that. So in that way, language differs in a different ways. In our community, normally we are not using, bad words in front of the male people. Among females only we use. Nowadays it may be changing, looking through the TVs and all. So there are so many good things in every community, I feel. And another thing, as he was telling, land is not ours. We belong to land. Morning he was telling that word, it was very much suited to our people. Because we will think, this is land. Who will take? Nobody will take. So we will live without fear. Happily we lived. But present situation, it is very essential to have everything in a return, to fight with the court, fight with the land rights. So in that case, we have to have proper writings. Those days we are not having deliveries in the schools and all, in the hospitals. So no bother, BO, this birth certificate is not necessary. And nowadays where we have to write and properly and give it to the nurse and all. Then we come out and ask for birth certificate, names are changing. Nobody bothers, but when they go to higher schools and compete with the other community, when you come to the mainstream, then there is a problem for a certificate problem. And recently I gave one grievance day problem. All our ration cards, they didn't mention our village names. Now if you give an address, the ration card they should mention, no? They mention the common street or Woodside Road or any recognized place people's name. So if they don't mention our names properly, that is another problem. We are in the European period, some missionary people, but still they took effort to record all their names and everything. They gave Toda names as well as Tamil names, official language names. So in that way, I was able to represent the government. If somebody took our land, I told this is the old name. You just give the Pudumandu means new village. So it is not a village, though it is depends on that. When I've gone through the grammars, writings and how to pronounce them, why we need a pronunciation properly in each language means when we have a prayer, we have to pray properly. If the pronunciation is wrong, the meaning changes. So in that case, even mantras, maybe other communities, that way we need a proper pronunciation. Once in a year, our people gather and do their annual prayer. Those days, when they pray, they will take 10 minutes. They mention the words and pray together and all. Nowadays, they are not teaching the youngsters. They don't know what they are praying. Simply, they kneel down and get up. So, the learning prayer is also very important. Then, I took the Emma's book. There, I found in my village there are 84 words for praying. So I was able to read some pronunciation of the letters like then all those things are coming. There some new letters. We came to conclusion around 53 sounds. So that way I was able to read. Then I wrote to my son, please try to learn. You don't know, because you must learn. When you become priest, you should pray properly. Then only we will get the benefit like that. So this is also to learn on religious practices and all. And the way of writing and preserving language is very important as well as possible, I think so. And yesterday's poem, I read it, and that poem is about the monsoon. There are so many verbs are coming. Then nash, ish means play. Then kud, id, come. Kuds means frisk, that's cough running happily. Then tilk, turning. Some Tamil words are coming. Patch, catch. Hus means beating. Put, dashing, slowly dashing like that. With, musical instrument. Oath means dancing. Purs, purse. The R and dot is purse, spring forth. Then old rising, wood running, cots bearing fruit, cots. Oi becoming, cause shining, tirts twittering, birds twittering, puts sticking like that. So these so many verbs, 18 verbs are there. So these verbs have got special sounds. So it is necessary to write in English or Tamil to find out and to pronounce. Maybe first we learn ourselves, then to teach the world if it is necessary, if anybody wants to learn this is one. Finally, I come to a conclusion. I want to give one important, I don't know. So, and I read in the books when they are translated, in our own language we have better translation because our thinkings are different. In our Hindu, maybe everybody, we have so many relationships, Pelyaka, Chitaka, sister and like that. But in English, only uncle, auntie, like that. So when many authors, I don't know, nobody interrupted. They all written, even tribal research people also just written the same thing. Dairy, what is dairy? Today temples are called dairy. Dairy, I can read in the dictionary, it is dairy product making, I think. When I asked the people, they said, you are just milking. It is all the dairy process, that's why it's a dairy. I said, it has got some sacred process inside. We are taking milk and we believe there is a small word at the backside, like, what's it called? Temple inside. There we have to pour the milk 3 times, calling the god, and light the lamp, shining the milk and all. It is not an ordinary process. What we are doing is house. If we do the same process at house, it can be dairy. But in that temple, it is a sacred process. So I requested them, this is not a dairy, just please write it as a Toda temple, translate our Padghosh as it is own language. So there are so many things to be corrected. Then we have a better feeling. Then finally I come to the conclusion and I don't know what is my time. Money means bell, money in Tamil, no? That's a bell. But for us, money means it's not a bell. Each temple, we are having our ancestors' object, that is Kula Devam, they call it. That object will be kept in all temples. Nobody knows what's happening inside. But when they write, when they do research and all, they just compare it and write. That bell, no, it's not a bell. Each temple has different. Money should write as some equivalent meaning, like a sacred object, like that we have to write. There are some corrections. Then finally I come to conclusion. Now we all had a seminar in English, no? Like that, once they are building very, something to go to the sky. So they are all talking one language, they are about to reach the sky. They are very proud and so much thinking themselves. Suddenly God thought we should give a different language. Then they don't know what to give. If you ask me to give a stone, I will give you the wood like that. So they can't climb to the sky. They stopped in the halfway, nobody touched the sky. So in that way, we should talk different languages, different languages, and encourage, preserve those languages. And even once buffalo was talking, why is not afterwards God stopped buffaloes talking. There are so many buffaloes, 100 buffaloes. Man has to milk, 2-3 man has to milk each buffalo one by one. The buffalo was asking first my cough. Instead of having discipline, then God said you should not talk. So put one plant and bark and stop talking. And crow was giving a rumor from other world to this world. Then crow also stopped because of bad talking. They stop. They cannot talk. I mean, they cannot talk afterwards. There are some moral stories like that. If we talk, we have to talk. I mean, it will be useful to the world message or useful to the human culture. Thank you for giving my time.
Thank you, Dr. Vasamalli ma'am, for the perspective from Rhoda community, and she is poet. And 2-3 things that became very clear, at least to me. The last one was more important, but if I state that, then I'll have to be silent. But what she stated was that as far as the preservation of cultures, particularly orality in cultures is concerned, indigenous people have to play a big role in it. But only with their help, that will be properly sustained. And another thing which I think is common in all our tribal discourses, what I mentioned in the morning about Dungri Bhili, the sentence that they have, that land does not belong to us, we belong to the land. And that same thing became very clear when she spoke about the primacy of land. And when land and culture, nature, they are preserved, then the culture will be automatically preserved. We will have interaction with you a little later, ma'am. I invite Mr. Karthik Narayan for his views from a socio-linguistic perspective.
So good evening all. So I'm basically a PhD student working on Todas and Todas in the media. So my experience is mostly drawn from my fieldwork experiences. My views are mostly drawn from the fieldwork rather than theorizing. But I do try to theorize it in some way. So before I move to my view, let me make my assumptions right. So I do not see the increase or the reduction of domains of use as a symbol or as proportional to language vitality. An increase in domains of use do not necessarily mean the language is vital, or a decrease do not necessarily mean the language is to be getting to be engaged. So there is no direct proportional link to that. There are a lot of other social factors that play a major role in it. Even if a language increases in its domains of use, if the language prestige and if the language political power falls, there is going to be language engagement eventually. For that instance, Toda and Toda is one of the most important cases where land right is protected for the continuous usage. Land right and the right towards traditional employment and traditional culture has been protected there. So once it is not there, it is not going to be practiced. So that is a basic assumption that I go with. So recognition and empowerment is necessary for any unwritten languages to be protected or to be survived. But provided this, whatever has been so far delivered here have been of the survival of the languages in the present times. But our present times is also a time of transition. We have the Indian scenario, the majority community in the Indian scenario have been transcending from a traditional society, traditional agrarian society to a modern industrial age. Even before this transition could complete, the new transition has been set upon us. The digital transition is here. The digital revolution is happening around us, and it is going to be real. It may not be accessible to all of us today, but it is going to be inevitable. Digital era is going to come and it is going to stay here. It will not be here for the next 20 years, but after that we are going to move into a digital era. The digital era, will our unwritten languages survive in this digital era? Technology today is inexistent for many in this country, but it is not going to stay the same. Technology is changing rapidly. Technological development and also business desires is making technology accessible to all. I'm making it very clear, businesses are making technology accessible to all. So I have no other thoughts on that. So this digital revolution, this digital era, will our unwritten languages survive in this digital era? Now that is the question that we need to ask. So that is the era that we are moving towards. And as Professor Sahitya pointed out, that it is not really a clear picture that we are getting today. We have to take it with a bit of skepticism, but still, there is also a bit of hope. The digital era, at one level, is going to alter the existing domains so drastically that what was considered as a home domain is a social-linguistic term that refers to a language used within the context of a home, within your close relative. Now, this domain is now going to be restructured and reconceptualized drastically when a new channel of communication is introduced. That is going to be the digital channel. Now, in this digital channel, most of the unwritten languages, which are actually home domain languages, will they survive? To survive, they need to adopt. Okay? For most of our unwritten languages has not even adopted to the industrial needs, that is the writing and reproducing and reprinting of the books. But can we actually make this transition from oral to the digital? And if we do this transition from the oral to digital, do we see a hope? Do we see a hope for our unwritten languages to survive? Yes, we do. But the problem is, if we do not, what we are going to face is the language is going to lose its functional transparency. So there is a functional load for each language, which is very clearly said that this language is for this domain and this has been transparent so far. But the moment you lose the ability to adopt to a new channel, it's called digital channel, your transparency is going to fall. Once I can't adopt my home language to this new channel, this is going to be written is also one necessary to adopt to this new channel, but there are other means of adaptations. So if I can't adapt to this new channel, my language is going to lose its prestige. Once I lose its prestige, I stop using it. And the moment I stop using it, my ability to use the language, but my knowledge of the language is also going to come down. It is not going to stay the same. So it is the usage that keeps my language productive and not the other way around. So this is a problem that we have to look. So, but however, even if we develop technological needs, even if we develop the technology needed for our present times, for the present digital time, will we sustain the language? The answer is probably no if we continue to retain our today's existing models. So what I would suggest is rather, my own things that I want to put into this discussion is rather restructuring how we see these systems like academia and supports that are given by the government and other established organizations. So we need to restructure and we need to rethink of our own demands. So before we go into the oral and before we transcend, we need to also restructure. So the oral and the digital can be transcended. The oral can transcend directly to the digital by skipping the writing. Not necessarily, I don't say that we do not give the writing skill. It can transcend into the digital mode and it can sustain that. But for that, we need to do two things. One, as oral was a decentralized system of knowledge, digital can also be a decentralized system of knowledge. Oral did not have a central authority. Oral never had a central authority. But written had a central authority, always had a central authority who can censor and who can purge books out of order. Now the digital need not have this. So we need to create a system which will actually decentralize. Our academies and our institutions like Central Institute of Indian Languages need to decentralize and rethink of how they operate. They need to be more inclusive. When I say inclusive, I mean of the knowledge producers themselves. So the next point is, so linguists, anthropologists, sociologists, whoever is going to write, we also need to change our own stuff. We need to also revise our own ethical standards. From being the keepers of knowledge, we need to go to a collaborator of knowledge. As Joseph was rightly pointing out, that our involvement with the people whom we are writing about also needs to change drastically. We need to move from being the authority to being the collaborator. We need to include whom we are writing as the producers of knowledge and we being the mere facilitators of that. So this sort of a structural change is required if we actually need to survive, we need to retain our unwritten languages in the near future. Because once we are into the digital medium is a self-regulating medium. It is not something which can be regulated by a central monitoring system as the government wants to. It cannot be done like that. Digital medium is endless medium. It can be rerouted. You block something, I can reroute it to 100 other ways. But what actually can ensure my presence in those things is self-regulation, and our bodies like Akademi and institutes of other languages have to become this regulatory body, has to become this decentralized body rather than being the central authority or the hierarchical structure. And the last thing that I wanted to make it very clear before I finish is writing. So if you start writing a language, okay, the next thing that we all ask for is education in my own mother tongue. To be very clear, I do not want to fetishize this notion of education in my mother tongue. Okay, education in my notion is a highly problematic notion for myself, for me, and also I would, for the communities that I have interacted with, it's also had been a problem. Decolonizing in this context is to make sure that what I already know is relevant to me in my education system. That does not mean that my languages also need to be present. This is just a view. I'm not saying it's the view of the communities that I study. Okay. I need a representation of what I know already. So when the kids goes to the school's education also must include what the kid already knows. It need not necessarily mean that it has to be the language of the kid, but it has to be the knowledge that the kid has. So there is a major difference between the knowledge and the language. So that I would want to draw upon, and I want to open this to the community, because many communities in this country also see that enforcing regional languages and enforcing mother tongue education on them as actually to maintain existing inequalities. There has been widely criticized upon from Central India and from Northeast. Enforcing mother tongue education on us is also something like enforcing the existing inequalities. So we need to rethink all these things, and we need to think of how do we democratize our existing systems. Basically, if this unwritten language needs to survive, they have survived because there was a democratic notion of orality. Orality as a decentralized notion existed, and that remained to be the most major factor that sustained our language. And if we need to look at it in the near future, we need to rather recreate this system. That's what my point is. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Karthik Narayan, and for bringing in different perspective about the unwritten languages in the digital era, and then the way he proposed multiple stages and strategies for restructuring so that these languages develop kind of adaptability so that they not only survive but thrive in the period. Let me put it very frankly, this was perhaps the most rich and vibrant session I've been associated with diverse views from different backgrounds and critiquing, countering with a lot of new interpretations and information, plus kind of strategies that should also be included. I'm sure that along with the views that are put forward here, there are many people who represent different languages. They would also have their observations, and they might have their own views different from what are proposed here. What I request you is that we please share your observations with us. If you have something to add, please do add. If you have something to question, please do it. And with this small plea, I leave this session open for interaction, so that we ultimately, when we go out as a more enriched being as such. The session is open for interaction. Somebody has to begin. Or our panelists might begin, and then you have to answer the questions.
I'm very interested to remind in asking, sort of for instance, you mentioned about education and what language you would be interested in. He mentioned about education, that how language in your mother tongue already, sort of heightens the inequality. So I think it would be a nice, and I feel very concerned about what should be the mode of communication or passing on of the language to the younger generation. So what would be the different modes which would be probably answering these questions? Anybody would like to?
Yeah, I have been involved recently with the Odisha project, where the multilingual education has become very successful. And what they have done is, right from the very primary education, they have involved the mother tongue of the tribals, because there are 32 tribes.
Use the system
I'm using the sound system. Somehow it's not elaborating. Anyway, so they have used the multilingual education system. So they introduced the children from the very primary education in the tribal language, and they use the state language as a subject. I myself, in 20 years ago, gave a kind of a formula, multilingual education in phases, and I'm very happy to see that now NCERT has started using it in Jharkhand and other areas, and it has brought some results. So the only way to sustain these languages is, there are other ways also, but the only major way that one can sustain these languages is to introduce them at a school level, and in phases, so that the child is exposed to not only his tongue, his mother tongue, as well as the state language, and eventually to the other language which is commonly known as lingua franca, Hindi, which is the Hindi belt, or whatever the language of the state is, and also English. Now this way, if they have, say, continuous teaching for 5 years or 6 years of their mother tongue, this actually infuses superiority complex. So it beats down the inferiority complex that you were talking about. And this kind of inferiority complex that the child has about his mother tongue, we linguists face all the time, because whenever we go for field work, the first question when we say, do you speak language X, and they always deny it. They say, no, we don't speak language X, we speak Hindi. Because everybody wants to, I had called this a foster language and the real language. So there's a foster language and real mother tongue. So this differences will also be mitigated if we have mother tongue education right from the beginning. The other thing is that there is no language can be given any importance unless it brings some economic power. So we have to deal related to the economic situation also. So if we have trained teachers from the community, teaching for 5 years, so they have a value of employment. And that will bring the sustainability of the language also because of the economic power. So that is one of the measures that one can help these small languages survive. And also the children can become literate in their language. And thus this brings to the second question, which has also come about the script that Aisha raised, that we have to, there is no doubt about it. I mean, we have more than 800 languages in this country, but not all are scripted. And if they all are not scripted, how are you going to run the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan? So the whole idea of Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan will be defeated if the child is not educated in his or her language. So the first task is to build as soon as possible, and the script doesn't have to be unique. We discussed in the earlier morning session when Avdesh Singh was there, that script doesn't have to be unique, because by making a script unique, you are unnecessarily burdening the child. And the English does not have its own script. It borrowed from Roman, Spanish and German and French all borrowed from Roman. Script does not give you identity. But as Avdesh Kumar Mishra also said in the morning panel, that every language is now trying to build its own script, with the result the scripts are not scientifically made, children are confused, and the education, the literacy is not being imparted. So this scriptology or the scripting phenomenon is a very important task that the nation has in front of us. It has to be done very succinctly and with very big efficiency, with taking the help of the linguists, I believe. It can be done, but it should be done on a mission mode. If the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan has to be followed.
Thank you. Please.
I think one is, of course, what languages to pick up to teach at what level. And the moment the decision is that there has to be multilingual kind of, many languages need to be taught, 2 or 3, at least three languages. The other question is, how are languages being taught? I think the pedagogy that is involved, even in the 1 or 2 languages that are being taught, I don't see whether it is Hindi or English in our schools in Delhi, for instance, and this is supposed to be where we're supposed to have trained teachers and this, that and the other. But from the point of view of how languages are to be taught, I think there has to be an orientation kind of training that teachers need to be given, and also to make it kind of fun and making the teacher realize that there is respect to be given to all languages equally. Because the hierarchy comes from the schools itself. But even when 2 or 3 languages are taught, what kind of hierarchy that everybody knows what happens is English is on top, and then it is Hindi, and then if at all there is a 3rd language, if at all, then that comes, and that's usually neglected. So there are 1 or 2 schools here in Delhi, we know, where, good, well-known schools where primary education is happening in Hindi, for instance, And there are models that I have in mind. But somehow that is only 1 or 2 individual schools that are doing it. Why can't we think of both in terms of language policy, in terms of what, where, and how many languages? Number 2, how? And how to break this hierarchy, notion of hierarchy.
We have been fighting actually.
It's not just the language, it's in our social system.
Yeah.
How we interact with people in the village and the tribes. There's so interesting to...
Can we, yes, after that we shall go beyond the pen. Please. Sir.
This interesting question of speech and tribal language as the medium of education. All I see is there is total half-heartedness in the effort. Yes, because I can tell you, the whole question of medium of instruction for the tribal came around 1870. So, if I chase the history of education in the tribal, at least in central India, it's a big question, it's never been a serious effort, and I can't understand. We have a Central Institute of Indian Languages, we have NCRT, both sister organization under the umbrella of one ministry. One year happened to be a coordination and develop a kind of device. There is rat race about, recruitment of teachers for tribal languages. but without literature. Without a single, I tell you, your effort I must see, and I'm sure that's better than, maybe landmark. But all I have seen are tracks. You cannot use them, those in education. I mean, in Jharkhand, I know. There is a bookseller who prints every year, and that is used as textbook. No idea, nothing is applied in there. So that is one thing. I was in Tripura University. So in the meeting, in the court meeting, I asked the vice chancellor. This is a tribal dominated area, what program you have. I happen to be tribal university, this question for me. So told me is there are 700 students in tribal language. The reason I inquired, because tribal languages graduate means quick job, easy employment. Because on paper you have tribal language as the medium of instruction. The reason I would assign to this is this, that the tribal themselves have been taught in a way in our education system that everything tribe is something negative, I mean it's inferior. Tribal childhood, because of this idea of tribe, pejorative idea of tribe, tribal themselves don't want to learn. When Seba comes out of the village to a small official town, would not like to learn tribal language. It's a very, big issue, very short about script. Now, how would you say about script which is Olchiki? Olchiki is basically Oriya version, kind of. It's Oriya origin. In Bengal, there is different pronunciation of Santali language. In tribal Jharkhand area, it's different.
Intervention, Olchiki has defeated its purpose. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Yes, exactly.
The Olchiki was launched to have the unique identity of the Santhals. But Santhalis were already literate in Roman and Devanagari. And if they had continued writing that, we all had written the Santhali literature by now. Now, Olchiki, the children don't want to read and write in Olchiki. And they are becoming illiterate if they are being pushed down the, through the road that you have to learn. So this is how it is happening, and that's why at least we believe that it is better to have a script which is of a state,
Actually, they know this. Roman script has been, I remember in my own
right?
Yeah, Manipuri is developed.
It's got to do with the political state power that you control, right? And they're able to encourage white literacy.
But one thing I tell you, there is some kind of a rat race in the eastern India especially. The whole city has come, so there is columnity, there is city among the whole. I mean, scientifically, whether the script is going to communicate the right word, like in Ura, ka. It's a typical.
See, you can always create diacritics. I shouldn't say always, but most of the time you can create diacritics. She's talking about Toda, she gave very nice, large examples of various kinds of vowels and consonants. And only I know and Karthik, we both put together and we wanted to give Tamil script to Toda, so that Toda can be, related, because they're all bilingual in Tamil. All Todas are bilingual in Tamil. So if they Toda has a Tamil script, it would be very good. But Tamil, has very few consonants to begin with. And they have very few vowels also. They are kinds of vowels. We could not, even making with all kinds of diacritics, we could not give Tamil script to Toda. Finally, our original, linguistics have very good methodology of phonetic transcription, which is opposed to International Phonetic Alphabet, in which we can symbolize each and every sound. You see, so that's not a problem. So the entire transcription was done in IPA. But the problem is that IPA is only read by linguists. A common person, for him it is a little difficult. So ultimately we have to take recourse to romanization with quite a few diacritics and with an explanation. And the book is now coming out on Toda next month, in fact maybe in a few days, it's all ready. So this is the very first attempt by Sahitya Akademi to bring out an unwritten language which was never written down in a written form. However, as we have all talked about, when we were transcribing the unwritten language, the spoken form, into a written, we were visualizing or we were hearing that a lot of things is being lost. As Aisha talked about it. It is a separate register. Lot of meanings were totally getting lost once you started writing, because there are. I mean, she quoted just one example, dairy. Now, dairy is a place where your milk is produced, or milk is collected and distributed and so forth. Because Toda culture has the basic ethos is of dairy, milk of buffalo. Buffalo is a very sacred animal in the community. Now, if you translate the word Toda word, which actually in English it's dairy, it totally defeats the purpose. It neither gives it the sacrificial nature of the whole thing. You know, buffaloes, if you just even if you translate the word buffalo, doesn't give the same meaning. So, you know, it is the moment, I mean, this I've been struggling with it for last 2 years, and every time I try to write some unwritten language into some kind of a written form, I realize that a lot of things are slipping through my fingers. What should I do? So that's why I've now taken a course, and it's very difficult to change the mindset of Science Academy. I'm trying to document the oral tradition in oral forms, in orality, in visual, in audiovisual, and orality forms, and I'm happy to see the entire Toda material that we have with the help of Vasamali. We have documented in oral and visual forms for all time to be seen. We're going to make it open access so everybody can see it. And similarly for Halbi, similarly for Chaudamsi, similarly for Kalahandi, there are 4 languages in this: Kamar, Banjara, Bhunje, Bhumiya, Agaria, and many others, and Pond and Puri, Puvi. All these languages now are in oral and visual forms available to us. I mean, we have done some translation, but as I said, with an excuse that this translation is only 70 or 60% close to the original, because we cannot do it. You know, all these words that she gave you, she just narrated. I could immediately sense that how different they are once you translate in English. Even the word morning is not the same morning in Toda, you see. And obviously the land, I mean the land which, as you said, we belong to the land, we don't possess land, is so very true because of these so-called development. We have killed the environment with the tribes. We have robbed them of their, not only of their language rights, we have also robbed them of their land rights, and the forest rights, and the water rights. So, I mean, they are losing their environment where they have grown. It was way of their life. So, the language is going to see change, but also the meanings are getting to see change. So, it's very difficult to fight against the current, but we have to find ways somehow to protect and preserve these.
I admire your evolutionary kind of things. No. For an educated person, this is definitely, I know our limitations in India. It could have been successful in Canada. They have all machinery, they have all mechanism, they have all wealth to build this kind of situation. But in a country like ours, and then their masters are educated, not uneducated, they know the value of the whole thing, but I wish that you are successful in your venture. And another point which I have in mind is that we are deeply possessed with the economic power. It doesn't go from our birth. Either we are dealing with Dalits or we are dealing with tribals. And in Maharashtra, for instance, when Devi took us there, and in a village we found English goddess in a square in a town. I said, what is this? He said, this is our goddess, English. We have to get acquirement through it, not through. Why is this? I'm just sharing it with you. All of you are more advanced in your experiments, but such kinds of spectrum and shortcomings and also difficulties do arise. It is definitely a challenging situation, and you are dealing with them at a grassroots level, and you have done a lot, and so are others. But at the same time, the dichotomy arises. On the one hand, we are literate people, we are tackling their problems. On the other hand, when we go to them, we are again, most of us are nonplussed what to do and all that. So this kind of dichotomy, of course, is prevailing, and I'm glad if you are going to have a breakthrough.
Well, what's the mission of this?
talking, they all said that
script is required for all the mother tongues to empower them. And we can't wait so long. We've already many centuries have gone. And so there is an attempt, there was now things are improving, to keep certain groups and communities backward, or as you have seen in the case of the Dalits and other people, same thing is happening to tribals. So Dalit, for example, somehow they got the access to many mainstream things, but tribes have still remained kind of out of bounds for these things. Now talking of, ma'am was mentioning the script. If you give Tamil, look at the Tamil orthography, the Tamil script itself. As I mentioned in the morning, that it has and but the symbol is only for ka. And because the grammar is such, this pronunciation system, that if it's intervocalic, then only the ka sound will appear. So if you have written, say, Ganga in Tamil, so it will be pronounced as Ganga. Ga will be there. The first one will be ka. If you have Padam or Pad, the sound, so then ta is there. It's final, then it will remain ta. But if it's something comes after it, then it becomes ta. So what I am in English is another example, where many things like we have seen certain letters are written but they are not pronounced, silent letters, or one sound represented by many symbols like f, gs also is for that, and English has 20 vowels, and but it has only 5 symbols for 20 vowels. So what I say that, see, for whom the script is, for whom the language is, if you are writing a book for the Toda children or another unwritten tribal language, then they will know what, like how to pronounce it, as in the case of Tamil or English. So that is not a big hurdle. So that should be kept in mind by the linguists who are trying to devise it. That fewer number of letters, that's not a problem, because the native speakers know. You look at another example of Khasi. Khasi took Roman in 1893. Before that was written in Bengali. Now earlier, up to 1893, it also used Roman in certain documents, Bible. There the K sound was written with C. So Kakita was actually by the Welsh missionary CA, then CITAP, Kitab. But later on they changed it to K. Now, and they don't have G, so there is no G. But they also have had problem, glottal stop was there, and it occurs frequently. So they chose that H will represent the glottal stop. Now, if it is the Khasi speaker, if the Khasi children are there, they know. So if they write D-O-H, no Khasi speaker will pronounce it Do. They will pronounce it as Do. But the outsiders, the non-Khasis, they will say Do, thinking that. So it's not really difficult, it can be worked out that which symbols we need. And lastly, you see, if you take any Roman Devanagari, not a problem. See, Devanagari, what happens? So it doesn't matter really. You have more symbols or fewer symbols. So that will be translation part apart with the words losing meaning, that is different aspect. Hindi had shrub, word and shrub, it was a shrub. And then it had it was now still we write it, but all in the speakers. The standard in the speaker, they will say as na and sh as sh. And but in some parts of UP, so ra becomes ra. So you will have ra pronounced as ra and ra pronounced as ra. So Garud will be Garun. There. And Ganatantra becomes Ganatantra, or excuse me for saying that, Ganatantra. So that is, you see, so all these are changing, so it doesn't really matter. And we also, when we adopt a Roman script, one problem is that, see, they ultimately learn English. Hindi, maybe not. But English, all Indians, every state, they have except 3 or 4. all states have introduced English in +1. So every child has to learn English. Now, given the sound system of these languages, so they have Roman, and I have seen this in schools of Nagaland during the project of NCRD. So what happens, because in English, Roman script is there, but they have to master a different kind of sound pattern. But in AO, they have to master another. Like in AO, initially the voiced consonants voiceless consonants become voiced, and vice versa. So in Roman, what will happen? Dog will be dog, bag will be bag. So you understand the point. So you're taking the experiences that we have when we gave new scripts or the old scripts to these Unwritten languages, what happened to it? And Sir Bara was saying about Onchiki and Kurukh. Now that's not a problem. Kurukh problem, I think, has been solved. Devanagari was not really so appropriate for the Kurukh sound structure. Now they have in Kurukh, the letter for Kh is also there. And Onchiki, people think it differently. It was created by Nagmanu. But if you analyze it properly, it is much better than Devanagari and certainly much better than Roman. Because Onchiki is not syllabic, it is alphabetic.
Yeah.
So that also we have to consider that for certain tribal languages, it's not always good to have a syllabic script, rather you can have logographic or alphabetic would be. So Onchiki has no problem, and Kurumsuki, which is approved by the Japanese government in 2011, so that is now going to change. Problem of education remains. Someone, Ram Sudhika was saying. See, we all are thinking from the adult's point of view. No one thinks what is going to happen to the young learners, the children who have to learn. Now, and the situation that people have the panelists have mentioned here, teachers we won't have until next 50 years in India. The way it is going, NCRT, CIL, these organizations were given the charge, and we still have 125,000 language teachers untrained. So all emphasis is on Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, only the 22 children languages. And that's why every language wants to come in the institute to get these benefits. Yeah. If it is there, then only they will provide the teachers, then only they'll have schools, then only they'll have books. So
I think very well made point. Before I express my gratitude to our panelists and particularly Professor Abhi, because she will have the last word. Sir wants to have 2 words, 2 minutes for language of silence. No, that you don't worry. At least I will be the last speaker. You can come. You come here. Come here. What is the problem?
ये जो हेडिंग है लैंग्वेज अनरिटन लैंग्वेज, तो ये डायरेक्टली तो इससे कनेक्टेड नहीं है, लेकिन कनेक्टेड भी है. आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट साउंड ऑफ साइलेंस. साउंड ऑफ साइलेंस. अच्छा, तो उसमें मेरे को कैसे ये ऑब्जर्व किया, मैं ये लिखा था साउंड ऑफ साइलेंस. Is it for happiness, आपको शांति मिले, तो ये साउंड ऑफ साइलेंस ने मेरे को अभी मैं सुन रहा. स्वर ध्वनि तो आ रही है, स्वर ध्वनि तो आ रही है, तेरे ही गीत गा रही है. मैं सुनूं या ना सुनूं, मुझे तो ये सुना रही है. स्वर ध्वनि तो आ रही है, तेरे ही गीत गा रही है. मैं सुनूं या ना सुनूं, मुझे तो ये सुना रही है. और एक और, मैं कुल्लू वैली में एक संत बाबा नानक के डेरे पर गया, और जब मैं वहां से देखकर नीचे आया, थक टूट के बिल्कुल थक गया, क्योंकि बारिश हो गई, रास्ता बड़ा टेढ़ा था, पहाड़ से नीचे उतरना था. तो वहां जब मैं बैठा तो तो वृक्ष जो थे वो ऐसे ऐसे कर रहे थे। तो मैंने उनसे कहा, सिजदे में किसके हो तुम मेरे यारो, टू whom you are bending your head। वृक्षों से कह रहा हूँ, वो ऐसे ऐसे कर रहे हैं। सिजदे में किसके हो तुम मेरे यारो, ये खामोशी कैसी, ये चुप्पी क्या है, ये खामोशी कैसी, तुम चुप करो। तो वो क्या कहते हैं, खामोशी भी एक तर्ज़े ब्याह है, खामोशी भी एक तर्ज़े ब्याह है, चुप है हम ये तेरा गुनाह है। दिस इज योर इग्नोरेंस, यू आर नॉट कैपेबल ऑफ अंडरस्टैंडिंग, वी आर प्रेइंग टू द ऑलमाइटी। और एक बात और कह के खत्म करूंगा, वो ये है, आई वाज इन कुल्लू इन चंबा in a saint's place near the Ravi village, Ravi river। तो मैंने उनसे कहा, दिल्ली से आया हो, कह रहे किस लिए आया हो? मैंने कहा कुछ थोड़ा सा चैन लेने के आया, तो आप परमिट करो। वो कहने लगे वो जो सबसे एंड में कमरा है उसमें चले गए। तो मैं उसके एंड में कमरे में चला गया और वहाँ रावी इतनी दूर थी, रिवर रावी जितना वो दीवार है। तो मैं उसको साथ पूछता हूँ रावी को, जरा दम तो लो, जरा आराम तो कर लो, जरा दम तो लो, बहुत दूर से आ रही हो, ना गला सूख जाए, कब से गा रही हो। किसको कह रहा हूँ, रावी को, जरा दम तो लो, थोड़ा सा रेस्ट तो कर लो, जरा दम तो लो, बहुत दूर से आ रही हो, ना गला सूख जाए, कब से गा रही हो। तो वो क्या कहती है, सुन ऐ बोले राही, दम लेना मेरा दस्तूर नहीं, लक्ष्य से पहले रुक जाऊं ये मुझे मंजूर नहीं। तेरा ही काम है कि तू सांस लेके चल रहा है। तो फिर मैंने कहा एक मिनट, कहा इतना भी 1 मिनट मोर, ये भी काम की चीज है। ये काम लेगी आप, ये मैं I am student of Dr. Naran, who was the president of this for number of years। तो मैं ये कहना चाह रहा हूँ, रावी ये तो हुआ, सर उसको रावी को कहता हूँ मैं कि ये बुक इन ब्रोक है, नदी थी ना, बुक इन ब्रोक है, ये सरमन इन स्टोन है, ये राजपथ उसी का है, ये नोन who known yet unknown है।
आपको डिवाइन हीरो हो गए।
How eloquent is the language of silence, we realize in last few moments.
Can I take 1 minute? Just 1 minute. There is no time.
Prosaic statement.
This is for Abhi, Professor Abhi. See, new education policies out. There is no mention of unwritten languages and oral traditions. Number 1. So we have to take care of that. We make plan, we get very small money, and it's not necessary to preserve, digitize, make it online. Nothing can be happen unless it added to the new education policy. Number 1. Number 2, 12th 5-year plan never speak about the languages. It speaks only about promoting Bangla. There are 2 pages written about how to promote Bangla language and how to preserve a knowledge system in Bangla. Why can't other languages? So now 13th 5-year plan is coming up, and those people who are very close to government sector see that 13th 5-year plan should keep substantial money for digitizing, for making online whatever for unwritten languages, and new education policy should include the policy on language, especially on the focus of unwritten language. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No reference. What your one line?
Good points that we have made, and I think Professor Abhi, who is looking after the center here, will try to incorporate and put them across at the suitable format or the suitable level. I would request Dr. Abhi to have a few sentences at least, because you had something in your mind, and I still feel that I thought that the question that I had in my mind remained almost undiscussed, particularly in the session that we had for discussion. That if we plan about future, we need to think about how did our oral languages survive in the past. What was the cause of resilience? So that from that resilience, we can learn something for future. Maybe that all of you will think of in the days to come. Professor Abhi, please.
Thank you for reminding that, because I started this symposium keeping in mind exactly the same thing. I said, everybody is talking about endangerment, everybody is talking about language death, but in this morbid scenario, we should also think about that what is it, or what is the real fabric which is holding our oral tradition till now. And for thousands and thousands of years, these languages have survived. There are 800, 900 languages in this country. Despite the homogenization and holocaust of globalization, what is it? What is the real aspect of the issue that we must at least identify for the survival of these languages? There is no doubt that even the oral languages are now being transmitted into written form. At the moment they are transmitted into written form, a lot is lost. And sometimes even the languages die because they change, or they die because they there's a very big language shift, as we know. People adopt new languages, give up their own language. But this process takes hundreds of years. It doesn't come overnight. So that's the issue that I had in mind, but somewhat it came up, but it did not dwell upon it, and I expect that this will be dealt with in the future. I'm trying to, as I said, in this Sahitya Academy, I had to first battle with the mindset, because people really do not know that there is something which exists. A whole lot of literature exists in the oral forms. The best beauty about the oral literature is there is no demarcation between prose and poetry. There is no demarcation between prose, poetry and theatre. Everything, if you go and listen to, Lakshmi Jagan, we were listening to Lakshmi Jagan and Halvi, and I realized it went on for 5 days, and it had prose, it had poetry, it has theatre, it had dialogues, and it had painting. And painting was the Part-3 of the Odisha, So the oral tradition is so rich and holistic, because it actually is way of life, it's way of living. So that it's very difficult to document, as you can understand, with very limited resources and also with very limited mindset thinking. But I'm trying my best. However, there's one thing which I would like to share with you. There's another very serious hurdle that I'm finding, is that many times people don't want their oral tradition to be written down. And the moment I take out my pen and pencil, they stop speaking. They said, ask the sacredness that is attached to our words, or this couplet, or this air, or whatever it is, will be lost the moment you start writing. So that is the biggest hurdle, and that is a very big gap between the written and oral. There are a lot of avenues, a lot of realms of oral literature, which can never be converted into written form because of this. I should not say as a gap, but because of different way of writing and different way of maintaining the literature. So these people who think writing down oral will kill it, I think will sustain it. At least these people will sustain it. The only thing is the intergeneration transfer is there. Because if the elderlies die without giving this knowledge to the younger ones, then it will be difficult. In that context, I realized when we were doing fieldwork in Nilgiri Hills, although we also came across Bada, Kota and other languages, I realized that somehow people are maintaining their languages. There is, as I said, they are guarding them. So maintenance is a very, very important aspect. It doesn't have to, you have to have a sense of pride in your language to do it. So this Center for Oral and Tribal Literature is, it's very fresh and new, but I would be very happy if you send in your comments and suggestions, and also trying to write to me how one should go about it. But before I end, I request that this discussion will be very useful to me, because I'm sure you all must have enjoyed. Please send your 1 or 2 page or 3 page, whatever you said, also in a form of written. We would like to with the whole seminar today. And this is again, I'm on behalf of Sahitya Academy. Also, I was just watching with this Dr. Rao is here, so I could have asked him to step in. And on behalf of Sahitya Academy, I thank all of you to be here with us. And please don't forget to visit the account section on the 2nd floor to collect your dues. Thank you very much.
I must put on record my gratitude to all adult presentations, to Abhi for conceiving this seminar and beautifully chiseling this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We go back and